Hey drafters, welcome to part 3 of my YouTube studio build. In this video I was planning to paint this room, but there's been a bit of a setback. So as I was going through the process of preparing the room for painting, patching walls, cleaning them, and then removing the trim, as I was removing the trim with the pry bar, this happened. So as you can see, there is a lot of water damage in the bottom of the plasterboard. And as I was trying to pry that trim off the bottom of the plasterboard, it's basically just gone straight through the wall. As I tapped away with my hammer, it just opened up even more and sort of realized the extent of the water damage that is actually in this room. So I've got a lot of water damage from leaks in the bottom of this area. It also goes into this side of the room, probably about a quarter of the wall, and then also up in that section as well, because that line there is pretty much the height of the retaining wall. So I believe there's leaks coming through, and we've had a lot of heavy rain lately, but the leaks mainly go down into that corner, and it's damaged some of the framing, it's damaged the plasterboard. There's also a leak on that side under the door, and that's kind of where I started to first notice things, and where I first pushed a hammer into the corner of that wall and noticed there was some damage there. And then as I was doing this one, that's where I noticed there was more damage. So this video is probably going to be just removing all this material, because I'm going to remove all the plasterboard, going to find the leaks, seal them, repair any damage such as the frame, and put in new plasterboard. And then hopefully we can actually paint the damn thing. So let's get straight into it. I need to keep pulling apart this wall, and then I'll just point out anything along the way. All right, let's get into it.
So the first thing I needed to do was patch any holes, and to do that you can just use a typical wall repair kit putty. So using this, you just dab a little bit in the areas that you need to patch and just smooth it over. And for your larger holes, you can get this fiberglass tape which has a sticky side, and you stick that onto the wall, and that allows you to push some putty into the hole behind it and try to seal the hole better. So this is good for your medium-sized holes. Don't be afraid to load it up with as much putty as it needs, and then just feather it out towards the edges. Once the putty is all cured around the wall, you can start to go over it with a light sanding. Just be aware this kicks up a lot of dust, so make sure you're wearing a mask. And once I lightly sanded the walls, I used a damp cloth just to go over and pick up any dust that was left on the wall. So my plan after painting this room was to do some self-leveling, and that's why I decided to remove the wall skirting. And that's when I discovered all the water damage in the walls, because the crowbar just literally pushed through the wall behind it. So instead of getting into painting the room, I had to remove all the skirting around the room. So as I'm removing this skirting, I can see the damage, and when I removed parts of the wall, I could actually see behind it where it was basically full of mold and rotted framing. Add to all this, it started to rain really heavy, and I was getting a lot of leaks coming in from under the door and the back corner wall, and this explains why there's been so much water damage over the years in this room. So it's probably a good thing that I decided to repair all this before painting the wall itself. The only thing left to do was completely remove this wall, because it was destroyed so much from the water damage. So I basically just removed all the plasterboard and turfed it. With all the plasterboard gone, I could now get in and try to seal wherever this water was coming from, and I suspected it was coming from under here, which is the top retaining wall. I also needed to remove any rotted wood from the framing, so I could feel back to where the wood was damaged and simply cut it back to that point, and then put in some new treated pine to strengthen that area again. And you can see with it cut out just how fragile this is now. The anchor bolts were also rusted and impossible to remove, so I simply just had to cut them off. Again, cutting away more frame, going up to a point where I felt it wasn't rotted out, and then just removing that section. You can see from the moisture there was a lot of ants living in this wall as well. So from here I just had to measure up what I needed to replace and cut out the sections from some treated pine wood framing. To give it a good structural bonding, I used liquid nails as much as I could on both the wood and the surface area it was going to attach to. And because it was such a snug fit, I had to just simply hammer it into place. And I did this for any other areas that I needed to replace. Luckily, there wasn't too much I had to replace, basically just these two corners and another corner of the room. Where I could, I also hammered it with nails just to ensure that there was a mechanical fastening as well. So on the outside of this wall is where the retaining wall starts, and it's where I think a lot of the water was getting in. So I sealed this side as well and just gave it a little check to see if any water was leaking through. And I think I fixed it, but it wasn't completely fixed because when the next rain came through, there was definitely some more leaking coming through. Since I had the complete wall torn down, it gave me an opportunity to put in some insulation because this wall was absolutely fuming hot in the summer. It radiated through heat, and it makes sense because there was absolutely no insulation behind this wall except for some light foil sheeting. So this insulation wasn't too expensive, and it comes in the correct width, and all I have to do is cut out the length and then stick it into place. I definitely advise using a mask with this stuff because it is very fibrous, and that's all the insulation done. Now on to the next part, which was putting on the new plasterboard. With this process, you want to first start with stud glue and put that in the middle frame. You can then put your sheet into place. I had to buy smaller sheets just due to what could fit in my car, and then I used mechanical fasteners to drill this into the frame. And then I just continued along the wall, putting in the stud glue where it was needed and fixing the next board into place. The important thing here is that I left a 15mm gap at the bottom because the next step will be self-leveling this floor, and I needed some space for that. Otherwise, this process wasn't too hard to do. Unfortunately, I didn't get to film any of the plastering of the joints, but basically you just run some tape across and then do a few layers of joint compound and then sand it all back. So I've picked up filming here where I've done all that, and now I just need to clean down the wall of any dust. Finally, the day has arrived where we are going to start painting the walls. So I went off to the hardware store, got some paint, some primer, some painting tools, and everything else I could possibly need. The first thing I wanted to do was use masking tape to mask off any sections that I didn't want to get paint onto. Looking back, I could have just removed the plates from these electrical outlets. Basically, I just went around all these points and put the masking tape on, and also around the trims of the walls. Because this is new plasterboard, I first needed to put primer on it, and this gave it a good bonding surface for the paint. Whereas the other walls I didn't replace, those were already painted and basically just needed a good clean. With the primer and the paint, you first want to cut in, which means doing all the edges and around any electrical outlets first, and then you can go into your roller to do the larger surface. After I'd given enough time for the primer to dry, I could then cut in with my first coat of paint. And when cutting in, I actually recommend to do each wall in sections instead of the whole room, but I didn't know because this is my first time painting, so I just basically went around all the edges and all the outlets and cut in first. In the end, it didn't matter too much, but I would recommend just doing each wall in sections. And then came the fun part, which was using the roller to do the bulk of the wall surface. Being the first coat of paint, it doesn't look that great, but once you get the second coat on, it starts to really take effect. The main thing I learned from painting this wall was don't be afraid to just put on heaps of paint. The roller will basically move it all around and smooth it out, but if you're trying to go light, you just end up taking more time. And it's here that I was pretty much finishing the last coat of paint. This means the whole room has been painted, and it really does look completely different at this point. I'm really happy with the result, and it's the perfect color, just what I was going for. After so much work, it's really good to finally be at this point. One of the final things you need to do is remove the masking tape, and I recommend doing this about a half hour to an hour after you've done your last coat. You want the paint to be dry to the touch, but not completely dry. Then you can use a knife just to cut around the tape and then peel the tape away, and if there's any paint that flakes off, you can just use a small brush to touch it up. That was the end of the job.
Okay, and as you can see, the room is all painted now, and I'm starting to get the background that I'm wanting in my videos. It was a lot of effort, this one, a lot of problems that I had to overcome, but we finally did paint this room. It's looking really cool. It's just what I wanted. The next thing I'm gonna have to focus on is self-leveling this floor and then putting in the hybrid flooring to finish that off. And then after that, we can finally fit out the room, move in some desks and some tables and my 3D printers and have everything set up. And so after that, the room will finally be ready. I can start filming, doing my content in here. Hopefully not too far off until I'm ready for that. Anyway, if you found value in this content, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And until next time, catch you around.